Planning Committee meeting of the 9th of August. We have with us Councillor Basalt, the Lord Mayor, Councillor Lohberger, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Dudder, Councillor Harvey, myself. We have apologies from the Deputy Lord Mayor and Councillor Sherlock. Can I ask somebody move the confirmation of minutes from the previous meeting? Councillor Dudder. All those in favour say aye. Can say no. Carried. Consideration of supplementary items. I don't believe there are any. Nope. Thank you. Indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. Are there any? No. Very good. Transfer of agenda items. Nope.
Do you want to do the one that we've got representations for?
That's
first?
that's part 5 is consideration of items with deputations. So we'll do them.
Oh.
Yeah. So on that, consideration of items with deputations. Can somebody move that? Councillor Dudder, all those in favour? Oh.
If I may just make a suggestion, I'm not sure that we've got a staff member here for the first item, and I'm not sure that it actually will take a significant period of time. There might not be any commentary on it at all. Whether or not you just want to smash through it, let the staff member go home.
How does the rest of the room feel about that?
Consideration.
Not out.
I'm happy with that. I would move the recommendation.
Hang on, what are we talking about?
Lights.
No, I've got some questions.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, if there are going to be questions about it, then we might just do the item with deputations first.
Yep.
So Councillor Dudder moves that. All those in favour say aye. Can say no. It's carried. So we now have committee acting as a planning authority, and the first item we are hearing is item 6.1.2, 47 Manning Avenue. We have a couple of deputations. First up is Mr. Joseph Roach. Table just in front of you, and sit as close to one of those microphones as you're able to. Does this one have a presentation? Oh, no. Thank you, Mr. Roach. You'll have 5 minutes to address the committee, and I'll give you a warning when there's 30 seconds left, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions for you.
Okay. We're not opposed to development at 47 Manning Avenue. We are opposed to the scale of what is proposed. 2 4-storey apartment blocks, 11 apartments over 3 levels, over ground level garages. The rear of building 1 will be buried 4.5 metres into the slope, which is acknowledged to be a landslip risk by council. Building 1 will rise a further 11 metres until, on the plans presented, the roof will be level with the floor of our apartment. This actually shows what that will look like, as measured by a surveyor last week. The earthworks involved will probably be in the order of 700 cubic metres, and that's just for building 1. It'll be similar for building 2. What the impact of the earth removal will be on the steep slope on which our apartment sits, we don't yet know. We do know from bitter personal experience back in our previous home that heavy earthworks, even 100 metres away from residential property, can cause significant damage. We've asked what happens if this happens. We have not had an answer either from council or the developer, so we ask again. The issues for building 2 are essentially the same but worse. Building 2 will sit 2 metres higher, which is an even greater problem for our neighbours whose property is situated slightly lower on the slope. Building 2 will block the view from their ground floor. It's a unique site, we all acknowledge that. But council's criteria are the siting and scale of development must A, not cause an unreasonable loss of amenity to adjoining properties, having regard to 1, sunlight, 2, overshadowing, and 4, visual impacts caused by the apparent scale, bulk, or proportions of the dwelling when viewed from an adjoining property. How can anyone pretend that 2 structures 11 metres above ground level, which together are 67 metres wide, and that entirely blocks the view from the ground level of 6 Evelyn Crescent, be considered a reasonable loss of amenity? We're also concerned that plans presented to Council include overshadowing diagrams which may not accurately represent what will actually be built. One of our concerns was about elevator structures. The developer has since come back to us on Monday to say that elevator structures will not protrude above the roof. That's welcome news, but we would like it documented if this goes ahead. We've asked about solar panels, which could easily add upwards of 0.5 metre to the roof height, depending upon how they're oriented. Again, the developer has come back just this afternoon to suggest that they are considering solar panels, but they may lay them flat. The further issue for us here is, of course, those bright, shiny solar panels may be reflecting sunlight directly into our living spaces. If the development were for 6 apartments over 2 levels, we wouldn't be here. Neither would our neighbours at number 6. We emphasise we are not opposed to development of the site, but what is proposed is essentially enormous. Hobart does need affordable housing, and more of it, and this site can support that.
There's 30 seconds left, so you could wrap up, please.
9 apartments over 3 levels, capped at something like 7.8 metres, we consider very reasonable. 11 apartments over 11 metres height, we do not consider reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roach. Are there any questions? Councillor Basalt.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So how far from your window would this development be? More specific.
Look, on the plans, the rear wall of building 01, which is the one closest to us, is somewhere between 18 and 20 metres from our building.
And a supplementary for my Chair. And would you be satisfied to a degree with a condition around non-reflective roofing material? Whether or not that would cover an application of solar panels in the future, it would need to be determined. But would that be something that would be useful to you should this go ahead?
Well, without conceding our real concern, which is the height, obviously things that ameliorate the impact would certainly be highly desirable. But if council wants to go that route, then there need to be protections to make sure that what's agreed is enforced.
Thank you.
Councillor Dutta. Oh, sorry, and then the Lord Mayor.
That's right, you go first, Councillor. Oh, thanks, Councillor Dutta. Just on the land slip question that you've, so you're saying that it's identified as a landslip zone?
Yes.
And were you satisfied with the information that the council officers put in the report about that? Or they said it would...
Look, I guess one of the differences is, as various people in the Snowy Mountains are discovering, what you think is the case on reasonable grounds can be that it's essentially low risk with ameliorative measures, which is what council has said. What we know is that the real world sometimes turns out differently. People can't foresee everything.
Can't what, sorry?
Can't foresee every risk that actually turns up. And our question has been, well, if that happens, who's responsible? Or do we just have to wear it? It's a steep slope.
Yeah, we were out there today and it is a steep slope.
And the earthworks are very significant.
Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your deputation. Just 2 questions. Question number 1, Was there a consultation with the developer in the community? And if there was one, did you attend that consultation or discussion?
Look, I have to say the developer engaged with residents back in December. We had a chance to see their plans. We obviously raised our concerns with them then and also with council back then. In terms of specific things, we learnt about the lifts on Monday. That was very welcome, because normally lift structures are on top of roofs. I know that there are solutions that don't require that, and the developer has stated that they will use one of those so that there is no protrusion above the indicated roof height. That's good for what it is, but it needs to be documented. On solar panels, we raised with the developers back in December as to whether they might want to do that, because it seems a sensible thing to do in most circumstances. But again, it raises the height. It would call into question the overshadowing work that's been done, because I believe that doesn't take that into account.
Thank you. And that brings me to your last statement, to my second question. You have referred to clause 10.4.2 and P3 with regards to the scale and the sitting. And A, that you referred to, says very clearly, not cause an unreasonable loss. Now, having read I am assuming you've read the report from the staff, their argument is it's not unreasonable. The cause is not unreasonable, therefore, hence the recommendation. Would you accept that? That it is really not an unreasonable loss?
No, we don't. But I think what I would point out to council is we are in number 8. We will not be as affected as the residents of number 6. Unfortunately, Dr. Sproul, who is the resident in number 6, had to be carted off to hospital on Monday and is still recuperating. But my comments do reflect his concerns. And for number 6, their ground floor view is completely blocked.
Got Councillor Harvey, then Councillor Kelly. Councillor Harvey.
Oh, sorry, I thought you pointed them first. With regard to your neighbour, they're below you, what sort of overshadowing do you think?
No, they're not below us, they're beside us, but they are sited a little bit lower down the slope.
Okay. So do you think, is that, well, in your view, and looking at the plans and the report, do you think they'll be suffering from any overshadowing?
Yes, I do. I went down this morning and took a photograph. The photograph shows that sunlight reaches the ground floor of their unit today in August. It's not the equinox, or not the shortest day of the year, but sunlight reaches their ground floor at the moment. I have not surveyed or had our surveyor look at their apartment, but I simply note that it is lower. Building 2, which will sit in front of their place, number 6, is higher. I cannot see, putting those two facts together, how there would not be some overshadowing of their ground floor apartment, or their ground floor.
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. With your discussions with the developer or your examination of plans, was there any conversations about where air conditioning units were going to be placed? Or had you considered that?
No, I haven't.
The only reason I asked that, I've seen so many developments done where it's not shown on plans or anything else, and then plonked on the roof is the big box.
Thanks, Councillor. That was something that I have not foreseen, but yes, that's a real issue.
Or they can be placed on the back of the house or the proposed structure, which does cause noise issues as well. So I was just curious as to what happens with that. No. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No. Thank you for your time. If you want to take your seat again, we'll move on to the next deputation from Mr. Mark Corrigan. Welcome, Mr. Corrigan. As per the previous speaker, you'll have 5 minutes to address the committee, and then I'll give you a warning when there's 30 seconds left, and then we'll likely have some questions for you. Let's start whenever you're ready. And
thanks for having me able to come along here. My name's Mark Corrigan. I'm here for two different functions. First of all, I'm a property owner from the next property downstream from the development, and my wife and I are custodians of 70 metres of the same rivulet. So we know the rivulet well. We see what happens when it rains, when it doesn't rain. We see life in the rivulet. I'm also convener of Friends of Macaulay Reserve. So I'm fairly involved with the care of the bushland, both there and upstream of the development. I'd like to concentrate on two elements. First of all, the health of Manning Rivulet and public access and amenity, both to and from the reserve and to the rivulet. First of all, Manning Rivulet flows most of the year. It's not just a gutter. The section of the rivulet through the reserve is in a healthy state. It goes through a remnant white gum grassy woodland, has endangered species, it has food source for swift parrots, and it has a spectrum of animal species that we've photographed with a wildlife camera. The proponent in their application misstates the vegetation type. They talk about obliqua dry forest. I'm pretty sure there isn't one Eucalyptus obliqua in the reserve. They misstate the local species as a result of misstating what type of forest it is. So the recommended species for the landscaping plan is based on a false premise. The proponent also refers to a declared weed, Salix nigra, which is black willow, as black wattle, which is obviously a native species, and they intend keeping this, what would be a declared weed, as part of the landscape. Disappointingly, the proponent also tends to ignore the quality of the adjacent land and treats the property itself as being an ecological island, and refers to only the adjacent land as undeveloped bushland, as if development is its only quality. The problem, this impacts on how the development decisions are made. For example, they assume that there is no fish. Now, I just happen to have a fish that came out of the rivulet. It's dead. It's a spotted galaxius, which is a native species. And that's not the only native species that's in there. There's eels in there. There's invertebrate in the rivulet. That type of thing impacts on the landscaping plan. I didn't see any reference, for instance, to fish ladders. There is an intent to make the riverbed healthier because there has been a history of weed growth. But if you don't consider the life that's in the rivulet, it's unlikely that it's going to be an adequate job. The block itself is also a wildlife corridor. There's plenty of wildlife in the reserve. There's plenty of wildlife leading up through Edith Reserve upstream and into Bicentennial Park. The wildlife needs a corridor, and historically it's been an empty block. Wildlife has used that block as a corridor, and there's concern if that corridor ends up being blocked.
There's 30 seconds left, so if you want like a wrap up.
The health of the rivulet is affected by the proximity of the building. The building is very big, and they've had to move the creek to fit the building in. The building is 20 metres wide. The space between the boundary and the creek was 20 metres. Unfortunately, the creek has been shifted as if it's just a drainway to be straightened rather than a habitat. So public access quickly. They talk about the public access being continue to be available, but in the landscaping plan, there's no route that's indicated, and there's no long-term security of the public being able to access from council facilities, a council pedestrian bridge, through to the reserve.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any questions of the floor? Lord Mayor and then Councillor Lohberger.
Couple of questions. The talked about so the landscaping plan. My understanding is that it's going to be legally bound through a Part 5 agreement. Is that your understanding?
I don't know if it's been secured in that way.
Okay.
I
I'll have to check that with the staff. So you mentioned the fish. There needing to be something around the fish in the landscaping plan. What would the?
well, for
quite
instance,
catch what you were saying.
they refer to a leaky weir, which is often a good thing to do in rehabilitating a creek bed,
Yeah.
where you hold back some of the water, just continues to leak through. If that's not designed to be able to allow fish species to navigate up and down the stream, then it's probably not appropriate.
So if we were to add something in the landscaping plan, something around some initiatives to support and be healthy for fish and other creek invertebrate species, that would be the kind of thing.
So that you don't get too great a hydraulic step, for instance,
Yep.
where it stops them from navigating.
Okay. The other thing you mentioned about the creek being moved.
Yes.
Is that where is that in the? I didn't see that.
It's very hard to see because it doesn't. I didn't see it in the narrative. You have to look closely at the plan to see where the original creek line was and then where the ultimate creek line ends up. There's a slight bend shown. That bend is shifted out so that it's straight, and that allows the driveway to continue on the length of the development. You still end up with a very narrow riparian zone, particularly on the development side. It's fine on the undeveloped side, but you have a concrete driveway lining a narrow riparian zone before you get to the centre line of the creek.
Understanding, and I'll check this with the staff and the applicant, but your understanding is there's going to have to be a moving of the creek by the developer.
The plan shows that the creek centre line is shifted.
By metres?
Metres.
Okay. And are you surprised that that's allowed?
I am surprised actually. I was shocked because we live on a creek. I know that we've got wiggles in the creek, and if we wanted to do any development, I hadn't thought of the possibility that people can go and shift a creek to fit in a development that that they want to squeeze into the space available.
Okay. All right, I think that's... and just on the Macaulay Reserve Bush Care Group, have you ever done work in this?
No, we
area?
can't.
No.
Because it's
Okay.
private land. We did lobby council to purchase the land when it was available, but it's zoned residential, it's expensive compared to non-residential land. It's probably cheap as far as per square metre for residential land because it's such a constrained building site. But we wanted to try and get some continuity between the reserve and Bicentennial Park. So this riparian zone was sitting there.
Do you think many locals will be surprised when they see something going in there? Like, do most locals think it's like part of the parkland or part of the reserve?
Historically, people have thought that, yeah.
Yeah, it sort of gives that impression, doesn't it? That's just
It
an
does,
extension. Yeah.
And because the you can see the desire lines that go where people walk through the block and the reserve, and it's just this continuous route that people take. Yes, it's misguided because people don't know that it's private land, but that's what people are used to, and it's very inconvenient if people don't have that access way from Churchill Avenue down the council stairs, across the council bridge, and then if they then have to continue along Manning, if they don't have access along the creek. So the preference would be to... the developers have indicated that they would provide for public access along the creek, but then I can't see any evidence in the application that that's going to be entrenched. And so that, whilst the intention might be there, I think council really needs to secure that access way.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair. Just through you to Mr Corrigan, just got a couple of questions actually. Just as the next downstream property owner, do you have any concerns about extra runoff coming from this site?
During construction, definitely. I pay a lot of attention to the water quality going through our block. When it rains, you can see if there's construction upstream because I see the change in siltation. When it's so close and there's so much earthworks to be done, I hadn't actually heard that, how deep the earthworks is going to be. That was astounding that it's 4 metres deep.
My other question's just about access. I just noticed in your submission that you just talked about the access to Macaulay Reserve, and that it actually appears to be a private right-of-way, the suggested access route.
Yeah, so if you're coming from Churchill Avenue and you wanted to go, for instance, to the school or the reserve or walk down Macaulay Road, you get to the pedestrian bridge, and the natural alternative would be to go through this block along the Manning Avenue side of the stream down to the reserve and keep going. If that wasn't available, the other alternative at the minute is to go further along up the hill of Manning, get to a gap between two houses, and then go back down the hill to the creek and then up to Waimea School. Now, the difficulty with that, and I have discussed this with council before, is that gap is a private right-of-way, even though it's council land, benefiting our block and our neighbour's block. Now, I'm not going to stick a barrier up there to stop people walking through it, But you never know what's going to happen with future property owners, or if, for instance, our neighbour decides they want to change their access point to use this private right-of-way, then that ends up creating a pedestrian vehicle conflict where you've got pedestrians trying to access the reserve down a private right-of-way driveway. It's not actually a public right-of-way, it's a private right-of-way. So if you ended up losing the pedestrian access down this private right-of-way, and you don't have access through the block that we're discussing, the only other option is to keep going down Manning Avenue to Norfolk Avenue, right down the bottom of the hill, turn the corner, come back up Macaulay Road, and it completely alienates the public from what is a beautiful reserve.
Just through you, Chair, just a couple more. Do school children currently walk through here to get to the primary school and back?
By the looks of the desire line, they do. I don't sit there and check out who goes where. But,
the other respondents is
but
nodding.
a lot of kids are playing around in the bush. They ride their bikes through that part. It's just as the Lord Mayor said, it's just considered to be continuous from the reserve. So, yeah.
My final question, Chair, is just another respondent made the point that the block, while private, has been used for public access for a long time. Is that your experience as well?
Absolutely, yep. And my understanding is that the Marshalls, who previously owned it, it changed. A couple of the Marshall family died. It was for a long time maintained as parkland, and they encouraged the public to use it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lohberger. I've got Councillor Dutta and then Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Just to follow up from that last point that was made. So, are you promoting or suggesting that a public open space be provided here? Is that what you're saying?
At the minimum, public access that is secured legally, not at the whim is the wrong word, but not
Expression.
so that you can comfortably use an access way through it. If there was public recreation space, even better, because it is quite a nice area there. Give or take the weeds, but definitely access way.
Okay. And the other question that I have, and if you were not around, then please don't answer it. You know, the 2018 flooding that took place,
Yep.
Did it affect that area with flooding? And if it did, to what extent?
It affected our place. I know exactly where the water level came up to in ours. We've got a 1200 millimetre pipe culvert under the drive, and it topped the drive. So that was like the hydraulic limit. The water level, I didn't see, it was in the middle of the night, the water level in that part, I'd be surprised if it didn't reach the proposed driveway. And the design, I think, has been 1%, what's the...
1 in 100 year, is it?
Yeah, 1 in 100 year. The 2018 flood was worse than a 1 in 100 year. So, and I think this has been designed for 1 in 100 years. So it probably would have gone over their driveway.
Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks. How long have you been working on your section of rivulet? And working in the reserve?
Me personally, or sorry, in our property, or
Yeah, the 70 metres that borders your property. Yep.
about 6 years, 7 years.
How resilient do you think that section is when it comes to, I don't know, flooding or whatever? Is there a big impact on your section? Has there been a big impact? Have you seen much scouring or?
I've been improving the scourability of it. We've planted sedge species to try and protect the banks and to stop further scouring. historically, it's been very scoured. You can see the bank, got very vertical banks, so it's been scoured downwards.
Yep.
But we've tried to improve it, but I've always been conscious of not creating hydraulic jumps because of the fish migration up and down.
So moving upstream into the development site, do you think the riparian area and the bottom of the rivulet being shifted by, it looks like several metres, will have a detrimental impact on the ecology downstream? Or do you think it's a feasible thing to do to change a river, to shift the riverbank?
So some things they're doing are good. Having pools and riffles is generally a good thing to do. However, taking curves out of it speeds up the water as well. So whilst you're getting some held back by the pools and riffles, I remember, I hope I'm not misquoting her, I think at least Jeffrey, talking about that pools and riffles aren't actually a natural feature of the rivulets coming off Mount Nelson. So it could be, don't ask me whether it's the right thing to do ecologically or not.
Yep. And what about the period of disruption? If it happens fast, obviously there'd be less disruption to the river than if it's a slow process.
Look, if it dragged on for years, it would be asking for trouble, because you've got disturbed soil that may or may not see storm incidents. And I've seen when we were planting how damaging that can be if you plant but you get a storm, or if you're just trying to get everything sorted out and suddenly the velocity of water coming through. So yeah, if you take too much time, it's statistically you're going to hit a scouring event.
Yep, all right, thank you.
Councillor Basalt.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Good to see you, Mr. Corrigan. So you've lived in your property for how long? And to distill your concerns down, it seems to me that your primary concerns are public open space, thoroughfare, and the health of the rivulet. Is that fair? Yep. Okay, so if we can put robust conditions around those three elements potentially this evening, would that ameliorate those concerns to some degree for you?
As far as I'm concerned, if there was a secured public access way, that would sort that part of it out. There are things that sort of surround that. In the landscape plan, there doesn't seem to be consideration of the interface between the private and the public. So if the public is allowed to go through there, that needs to be clear, and for people not to feel alienated from doing that. When I say that that the interface is clunky, for instance, the driveway going to the building is this concrete, precast concrete structure. It's next to this quite nice timber and stone pedestrian bridge. And so you get devaluing of the council asset by this, can I say brash? Yeah, that might be in the taste, but it's jarring. It's the sort of bridge that, you know, you might take a kid to play poo sticks off, which you might not do off a concrete precast bridge.
And one further follow-up. Can you see in some of the landscaping and the design of the pools and so on, that if there was public space provided, that it could actually lift the amenity and be a place where local children could gather to play poo sticks?
It's difficult because in the application it was designed with residents of the property to enjoy. Any public use wasn't clear in the landscape plan. There could be, if it was public space, it's a perfect spot for, play equipment or a barbecue or just a sitting area. But if it's made to look too private, then that's not going to get use.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions? The question I asked was already asked by another elected member, so if there's no other questions, thank you for your time. We'll move on to the next deputation, which is the applicant, Mr. Luke Chamberlain. Wait for that to, while that's getting, while that's all set up, I'll ask Chamberlain, and if you guys can introduce yourself, you'll have 5 minutes to speak, and I'll give you a warning at 30 seconds left, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions for you.
Thank you. Am I on?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Many thanks, councillors. I'm joined tonight by Liz Walsh, who's the project architect from Cumulus, and we're both here to answer questions as they might arise.
Just prior, Luke, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Palawa people in the country that we're on tonight, and pay my respects.
Thank you, Liz.
Our respects.
Our respects indeed. So my name's Luke Chamberlain. I'm a town planning consultant from Tract. And firstly, thank you to the officers. Many officers in your council have had a look at this site through the GMC process and the planning permit process, and we're very grateful for their advice, time and professionalism. Great developments start with a great team, and Liz and I are representing a fantastic client, which is a development partnership between two families. This is our third project together after successful projects in Battery Point and West Hobart. And it's their second project appointing Cumulus as the architect. And from my perspective as a town planner, I think that's an incredibly good choice. This site demands very careful attention, and it demands design response that considers its context and the very special attributes that both the submitters have referred to tonight. And we're also grateful to those representors showing their time and interest to us. A great development needs a great brief, and the attraction on this site from the very first time it was reviewed was really about that natural setting. It's aligned with the values that our client has about leaving a very good legacy, a development standing the test of time, and a very conscious environmental consideration and footprint. We've got an opportunity here to make this site a lot better. We've heard about the urban weedscape. We know that the rivulet's got some challenges in the way it functions and flows, and this development assists, or is a conduit really, to enabling those improvements, and we're very much committed to those. We were very interested to meet with the community when we convened a session down on the water back in December. We found that very valuable, and it turns out we've got a lot of common ground, and certainly the bush care views about this part of the world we share, and we're very interested in this being a successful habitat regeneration project as well. I'll step through this because it's on the screen, but councillors, thank you for visiting the site. I understand you've been there. Perhaps today might have been mentioned. I was there today also, just to reacquaint myself. This is a collection of photographs that I took in December. The weeds are sort of many and varied. The accessibility is there, but we think we can sort of make it a hell of a lot better than what it currently is. I pinched a couple of photographs from the agent's website when it was placed on the market. This is just to show a bit of broader context, and it includes some other apartment buildings on Churchill Avenue and Evelyn Crescent. So this is not an alien form. We're already seeing built form, or have done for many years, built form of this nature. The sign that is shown on the left has been there for perhaps, well, certainly wasn't there when I visited the site back in 2021, but was there last year. So I think the wayfinding has improved. So access from Manning Avenue into Macaulay Reserve has been there for some time and remains there, and is now easy to find. This has been a long process, and a process that we've been very happy to invest in. The pre-application meeting with your officers was December 2021. We had a general manager consent process. We received that last November. We then had the session.
30 seconds left if you want to wrap up as fast as you can.
And we've worked through this methodically. A lot of people have had a look at it, engineers, natural systems people, drainage, traffic, and all of it works on the advice we've received. The photograph there is of our session that we convened. We think this will be a beautiful project. We think it'll be something that's revered. It's nestled into the site quite deliberately, and we've purposefully quarantined one half of the site where we could have in fact sited buildings. And I think it's an important note to make. It's only 11 dwellings when the density here contemplated is 14. We want to be a light touch, and it's our very firm view that this should receive support, and we commend it to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I might start off the questions, and I'll have some for the officers as well. Just given that much of the deputations have been around and representations have been around the public access through the site, just obviously in the context of this application and the fact that it is private property, can you speak to that access at all?
Indeed. It's not a simple one. And I know it's not simple because I've been acting as a town planner for 20 years. When you've got private land, public access, you've got to have a mechanism in place to make it work. Otherwise, you've got all sorts of considerations, legal, indemnity, insurances, who's responsible for maintaining things, does the council want the land or not, is it add to the maintenance schedule burden? So we don't have necessarily a solution other than we're providing a landscape on one side of the creek that will be intended for the enjoyment of residents on the site. If there happen to be incidental enjoyment by existing community members, we don't have a problem with that. We just don't know exactly how that might be put together. And by the way, we don't have a planning permit. We're here tonight inviting your support, but sometimes these considerations can't be made because you don't want to put the cart before the horse. We haven't assumed we're going to get this thing and we'll go and work out a structure.
Councillor Dutta?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Just two questions. Question number one, you have heard the concerns and the points made by the deputation. Would you be interested or willing to defer this and have a discussion with them to take some of those points on board?
Through the Chair, thank you, Councillor Dutta. I'm not sure a deferral for this matter would be necessary or warranted. There's been so much work put into it by your officers, various referral considerations, many occasions out on site. We feel as though the considerations have all been solved, ostensibly. We can work out matters of access and details around that beyond an approval tonight. I do note that there were some remarks from Joseph with respect to landslip concerns, with respect to the prospect of solar panels. We're committed to continuing to have dialogue with the neighbours. What I can tell you is we'd be very happy to undertake or sponsor the undertaking of a dilapidation report on the adjoining property. so that we can have a proper photographic survey of that at the minute. We back the advice of our engineers. We understand that structural integrity of the slope will be maintained through a careful construction management plan. There's a whole suite of conditions in the recommendation before you tonight that are many and varied and complex, and we have to undertake those. And we don't come here tonight with any concerns over any of the conditions listed. In respect of reflectivity of solar panels and so forth, we don't have them proposed in the application. We're not going to die in a ditch over solar panels, and if the neighbours are worried about them, we can agree with a condition tonight.
But just on that, sorry to butt in. Would obviously talk about solar panels might be a matter for. It's not a matter for this. Not a matter for this application. But would you be open to some sort of condition on the non-reflective or lower reflective coating on the roof to avoid the reflection of light into neighbouring properties?
Indeed, and such a condition could be worded such that it was to the satisfaction of council, and council can then work with the neighbour to get a sense of their acceptance or otherwise of that. There's things like the angle of solar panels, you know, maybe at 15 degrees, you can achieve two things in one go. Make sure there's no interruption of that sight line while not angling the sun. But we're certainly open to that.
Yep. Councillor Dutta, was that?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just wait. Others will have a question.
Okay, I've got Councillor Harvey, the Lord Mayor, then Councillor Kelly.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. First question is to do with, would your clients be agreeable to a Part 5 agreement, which would clarify what happens on that potential through land, and also the maintenance of that land? I assume you've been talking to the council for a long time, so I'm assuming Part 5 agreements would have come up in those conversations.
We don't have instructions on that, and no. I'm not sure that Part 5s have come up at all.
So over the 2 years you've been working on this, you haven't come up with any sort of solution for access through the site that you're talking about, or that's been discussed around the table here tonight and mentioned by the representatives?
We haven't come up with a solution other than we're not proposing to preclude incidental access. So no fencing.
There's currently no fences indicated on the development application.
Okay, so so is that a condition at the moment, or if there was a condition that no fencing is allowed on the site?
There's no fencing proposed in the current application, and there's no condition on it. So.
Okay, but a condition might enforce it in case someone later decides they'd like a fence. And with maintenance of the site, how is that proposed to be conducted over the lifespan of this building? If you've got massive gardens, I assume you'll be responsible for maintaining them, and things that die will be replaced and all of that. Weeds will be controlled forever on the site because you've got a valuable reserve as a neighbour, and responsibility to look after that reserve as part of your development here. So I assume that is a given, and that could be conditioned as well, that you will maintain it in perpetuity.
We're on the same page.
Yeah.
Through the chair. Often you get an alignment or an overlapping of objectives between applicant, a council and a community. And there will be an owners corporation established, body corporate, that will be funded by the residents, so they'll have a fee to pay, and we're expecting it all to be owner-occupier. Those fees will go into the maintenance of the common areas, which include the driveway, the landscaping, the changed condition to the rivulet. It may be that members of this this building end up becoming friends of the reserve.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the sort of aspiration I think we would have. So you get that corridor extension, that habitat extension, and we're actually making a net benefit to the environmental condition of this area. We're very, very much committed to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. And just with regard to the realignment of the rivulet, how far will it be shifted? And what experience do you have in shifting rivers or rivulets?
It's marginal, so
2 metres, 3 metres, 4 metres?
2 or so, but we've got to be clear about what we're talking to here, and it's the invert line that provides the guidance. Liz?
Can you put it up on the screen and show us how it's going to work?
I have a. Does anyone have a copy of the?
I can share.
Indicate it. We can share with you. So essentially, I think there's some explaining to do about the concept of moving the creek. So essentially, as part of our natural values assessment, North Barker suggested that the creek needed rehabilitation and stabilisation. It's weed infested, it's largely scoured, and the natural invert is not clear. So part of the investigation work that North Barker did in their natural values was an assessment. And their finding was that it needed to be stabilised. So our civil team has put forward an option that led by North Barker, that best stabilises the creek whilst also providing habitat and flood mitigation and I suppose natural values, increased natural values to the site. So on the documentation, there's a site plan. I don't know, I can pass this around. But there's the red line indicates the surveyed line of the creek. And so the invert is the very centre, not necessarily the extent of the creek. And
the page number for that in our report?
And then the blue line is the proposed line of the invert, supplied by Pitt and Sherry, our civil and creek remediation consultants. And it's largely aligned. There is one area where it's shifted. I would be happy to provide a dimension. It's less than 2 metres.
Might be also worth noting that
It's all, oh, sorry. Yeah, you go.
General Manager's consent has been provided. I don't know if you want to take any advice from your officers about that, but this was an item that was considered in some detail. The General Manager's consent process took 7 months, which I think provides a pretty good foundation for this discussion tonight, and again talks to the fact that on a site that has difficulty, we've been able to work methodically to solve some challenges, and it results in something that will be better for everybody.
Okay. Now you've covered the creek and the open space other than permanent access to it going into the future. The other element is the bulk of it. It is a huge building. Even looking at the diagrams you've got in the report where you see the buildings in the background, I stood in front of those today and looked at them, and then in my mind, transposed it to the proposal in front of those buildings, and it is significantly bigger than the existing buildings in the area, in the direct area. So how do you respond to the representatives who said it is an overdevelopment of the site? It's too bulky, because I can see that as well, and could it be scaled back to get the same outcome, or slightly less outcome to your detriment but to the benefit of the neighbours?
We say that, so when a site's approached for development, an architect, I think, is the best profession to make proper sense of context, opportunity, constraints and so forth. The first principles approach to this site, as I said earlier on, was to keep one side of the rivulet clear of development. So an alternative here might have been more horizontal spread across the site, but we made a decision that a more compact footprint was appropriate. And I don't share the view that this is a huge building, and I don't share the view that the visual bulk is unacceptable or inappropriate. And that's on account of the fact that it's been nestled into that reasonably steep slope. There's a fair bit of cut being involved. That cut happens to work really conveniently in how we garage the vehicles. So it helps to sort of fortify that edge of the site, and then apartments rise up above it. When viewed within that context of it being a gully rivulet zone, we say it fits very comfortably and indeed does nestle. And that's distinct from some of the building forms that you see higher up, more exposed visually, and in the case of the Churchill Avenue example, 4-storey building with an undercroft car park.
Mm-hmm. I'm just cautious because I know other developments in Hobart that have always been, that were argued at the time, fit the landscape, not too bulky, and now I regret those buildings in Hobart. And there's one in West Hobart that I particularly regret. And I've lost a lot of skin over it when people still remind me of the fact that I voted for some of these things, All right, look, I'll let someone else ask questions. Yep.
Part of the strategy around the visualisation was not to show the least impact. So the top view shows the top impact, but the bottom visualisation actually is from the bottom of the rivulet and looks up towards the site. So it actually encompasses the whole development intentionally so that everyone can understand the impact of the development from down the hill rather than just... so intentionally we have tried not to, I suppose, disguise what the building looks like. We wanted to present the building in its entirety through our visualisation, so it was really clear.
Okay.
Can I have a further add?
Yep.
The architect has explained to me over the course of time that much of the detailing in the building is to respond to its riparian context. There's curves involved, there's finer details. Some of the horizontal details up higher are fine in terms of their depth. There's fine steel balustrading, there's not glass that gets dirty, and there's not extended bulk acting as balustrades and so forth. So a lot of care has gone into it, split into two. We could sort of go on about it, but probably don't have the time.
Yep. Thank you. I've got the Lord Mayor next, and I'll just politely ask everybody to stick to questions while we're still under the deputations rather than debate.
Just a very quick one. With this is the same developer who did the project in around Lower Jordan Hill Road, wasn't it? Has the landscaping plan been finished for that one?
Planted, you mean?
Yeah.
Installed. Yeah, it's right near completion, but when I was out there today, much of the hedging material's gone in some of the trees.
Check it out. I have, and just with the size of the building, I mean, yeah, the dimensions of 67 metres in that kind of cosy gully environment will be very, will make an impact, a visual impact, I imagine. But how many car parks are there per unit? Two, and then how big is each unit?
So there's a range of unit sizes. There's a range of unit sizes. So there's two bedrooms, two, 3 bedrooms.
And what sort of square metres are each?
So the two bedrooms are approximately 110 square metres. The smaller 3 bedrooms are around 160 square metres, and the larger 3 bedrooms on the top, they're approximately 205.
So they're big units. They're big apartments, aren't they? Yeah. They're quite luxurious. Yeah.
They're designed to be homes, not apartments.
Right. Yeah.
And they're designed to be single level, so that they're accessible. There's lifts. yeah, we wanted to make beautiful homes.
Yeah. I was wondering, so I wasn't clear about the Part 5 agreement and whether that would be acceptable, because I guess the concern is without some sort of legal covenant or some sort of protection for the community, there's no guarantee that in 2 years' time a fence wouldn't go up, or a future developer might say, well, actually, I do want apartments on the other side of the creek, and this owner might not want to do that, but without a Part 5 agreement considering that, we've got no certainty about that. Sorry, someone's pointing.
Would you like us to seek some instructions from our client about that?
I think that would be good. Yep. No, that's it there. That's the... Sorry.
Thank you, I was quick.
Yeah.
Fences, happy with the Part 5 agreement, absolutely. That can preclude fences, indeed. It can also preclude future development in the form of dwellings on the other side of the rivulet.
And as far as an easement or a right of way or something, I mean, maybe I'll need to ask the staff. I'm just really amazed that waterways can, not have some sort of easement. But I guess that might be something in the Part 5 agreement as well, some sort of public...
Could be. We're very conscious not to, in our application, dictate what we think should be the right public outcome. There's other stakeholders that might need to give consideration to that, community, the council.
Yeah, I mean, normally, if this was in Clarence or in a place where it wasn't this type of development, if it was a normal subdivision, we would get an open space contribution. But it seems as though when there are strata title properties, that law doesn't apply. So it's unusual, like if it's, and that's what open space is really important for us to sort of guarantee in a way. Okay, I was just, so did you get, your consultants looked at the creek movement? Did they look at the sort of impact of sort of speed of the rivulet, hydrology of that?
So North Barker have.
Right.
I will indicate that during their assessment there was insects and bird life, but they didn't assess any fish life, but they were on site for a limited amount of time as consultants, and they don't live next to it. So, but they, their report is, it comes with a series of recommendations and conditions about how to manage weeds, how to support growth of habitat, how to, care for the creek. So,
Okie dokie. And just around the, I guess it's around construction management issues. Has there been an estimate of the amount of truck movements they'll need to be to move that amount of fuel? Is that something, I guess you wouldn't do that as part of the planning application, but...
What I can say is the conditions are robust. I went through them all today. Approved. We need to design construction management plans on for a host of things. But all of our advice from our engineers is that it will work. We wouldn't be here if we
yeah, and I'm just thinking of 1,400 1,400 cubic metres of earth removal between the two buildings. I'm just wondering how many truck movements that is, but that's all right.
140.
Is that it? Yeah. 140. Okay. Sorry, did you?
Chair.
Thank you. I think that's everything from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I've got Councillor Kelly and then Councillor Basalt next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the three-dimensional view of the development. And just to confirm, the lift, there's no penetrations through these roof or add-ons to the height of this structure with the lift?
No, we've consulted with a Tasmanian lift company.
Sure. No, that's good.
Ensure that the lifts will not push through the roof.
And-
It's not a desirable architectural outcome for us, so we want a continuous.
And the same with air conditioning?
So on the the plans actually indicate service areas for all apartments, because servicing is often an issue and often an afterthought and put on top of the building. It's actually designed into the balcony spaces. So you can see on the plans it says service area. We've had that sized by a mechanical engineer. That's the size we need to accommodate the plant for the apartments. We've screened it appropriately. It's indicated on the elevations.
But not on the roof, just to confirm, not on the roof. Okay. With the public access we've been talking about, will that comply with regulations relating to widths and grades, surfaces, night lighting, all that?
I don't know. We gradient-wise, it works, but in terms of lighting and so forth, this is the sort of detail I was referring to before. We've got to get into that.
So if council do say, look, you'll have to comply with all the regulations in the Part 5 agreement, you would naturally comply with that? Because I just see it as an extremely expensive exercise. It's very noble to do this and it's fantastic and I agree with it, but I'd hate the situation to get, and I know exactly how expensive grading, all this work is to comply. I just hate that that's got to an argument that, look, it's beyond the expenditure of that. But if you're in agreement with that, that's fine.
We haven't budgeted for providing a public thoroughfare to council standard.
But if it's a public thoroughfare, council will say that it will have to be compliant.
Well, we've come in here tonight with the knowledge that there's a point of access, 100 metres or so up the road, and that we're not going to stand in the way of or preclude members of the public or the community finding their way through the site. We haven't come in here saying we're going to come and design or help you design a council space that meets council standards. And maybe there's a difference between whether it's council land or an easement in favour of the public, but you're probably quite right. We wouldn't want to get into a situation where there's a line item in a budget that means we've got to find something else to, go a bit lighter on. For example, planters or whatever in the building, or a particular specification of a material. But it's a bit hard when we're talking about, I'm sorry about my long-winded answer, but it's a bit hard for us to tally things up when it hasn't been our proposal to you that we're going to provide a park through this space.
Look, I'll ask this through the director later. Thank you on that one. But I think it's an extremely important, if you've got to comply with all the other conditions, which is understandable, one would think that for a public access that might be the case. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page and you don't feel as if the situation's been articulated well enough.
Well, there's no lighting, there's no lighting through Macaulay Reserve. And, you know,
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of the what's required there. One last question. You mentioned your successful projects that the two have been done. The one in West Hobart, was that the big white building in 26 Lower Jordan Hill Road?
yes.
I think it's the one that, because we have council has copped a lot of flack over that. Looking from other. No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Basalt.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, a few questions and a very brief preamble. I know this site, and I actually encouraged my in-laws to buy it before you lot got it. So there you go. I love the site, I love the neighbours, but I also love that. That's amazing. So I'm really keen to try and find what ground we can to get the best outcome for everybody. Was there ever any consideration for a green roof, and is there any capacity to do that to ameliorate the impact on the apartments that are overlooking the apartments?
We originally, so we talked about a green roof. We decided against it, but it's also been made quite clear from the neighbouring properties that they wouldn't want to see a green roof.
Okay.
Yes, so we could look at a pebble and succulent type scenario, but at the moment the proposal is a white matte clip lock sheet is what we're proposing to put on there, so quite inoffensive.
Okay, thank you.
You know, open to it.
With regards to the way the rivulet is handled, will you have expert input into how to do that? And are you willing to have council involvement or us assign that expert?
Conditions requiring the restoration, rehabilitation of the rivulet to be signed off further through management plans with the council. So council will have oversight or a say before we could go and turn any soil.
Okay. And on the final element of difficulty for everyone, which is the public space component, are you willing to make some design tweaks around the driveway to give the impression that this is public space, that it is accessible, whether or not that's a set of stairs coming off the retaining wall for the driveway, or even stamping the concrete as you would need to cross to get to the council bridge? Would you be prepared to make those kind of softer indications that this is open to the public?
Well, the driveway side of the development won't be a public zone. Our contemplation about where the public might be finding their way through is along that current desire line on the east side of the rivulet. The driveway's on the west side. But in terms of a driveway finish, that we're very happy to be looking at something that might be considered less jarring, as was characterised. But in terms of locational and siting attributes, that would be a less difficult proposition for us, given how many things we've resolved regarding access and tree retention to date.
And the final one through the chair, is there any plans for any furniture of sorts to be put onto the other side where there is no building, be that like a bench or similar, intentionally for the residents, but maybe used by the public?
The landscape plans indicates a series of decked circular platforms, and kind of there's some grassed areas, so they're intended for gathering. The detail around the seating and I suppose the amenity within those areas is still to be developed after the DA, but it was certainly intended that there is a series of gathering spaces dotted along that side of the rivulet.
A follow-up, if I may then, is it possible to build a connection from Manning Avenue into that area to give that public amenity that we're looking for here?
Well,
Would you consider it?
there would be, pedestrians would be able to get from Manning Avenue through to Macquarie Reserve. We've got to be careful about how we design and program that in an area that we're trying to restore as a natural, sort of almost a pre-European condition as much as we can. So I think it's some detail that would need to be worked through, but we wouldn't want to go and create, you know, a shared user path of concrete through there.
Oh, no, of course. Yep. Thank you.
Cool. If there's no other questions, I'll thank you. Thank you for your time. Well, I'll invite you to sit down, and then I'll ask somebody to open the item for discussion. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions of the staff. So who wants to kick things off? I see Councillor Dutta and the Lord Mayor.
I just have a question through you, Chair, to the officers with regards to Part 5 of the Land Use Planning Approvals Act. That's already mentioned in the report that they must have that, isn't it? It's just a matter of now identifying what is going to go on it. Is it?
Through you, Chair. I'm sorry, Councillor Dutta, could you just clarify which report you're talking about there?
Yeah, I understand that a reference was made to Part 5. Agreement. And so my question is that the report on page 151 already states that the owners of the property must enter into the agreement with the council pursuant to Part 5 of the Land Use Planning Approvals Act. So it's already there as a condition, but we've got to now identify what issues you want to be on that particular Part 5 agreement that will then be registered on the title.
Through you, Chair, correct. The proposed conditions do include a proposal that a Part 5 agreement is required, and that has a number of specific requirements in it already. I've had discussions with a number of elected members this week, and as a result of those discussions, I have prepared some draft conditions which can be proposed to add further requirements into that Part 5 agreement. Perhaps I can leave it there, Councillor Dutta, and if you have further questions, I can answer those for
Sure.
you.
So my understanding of this is that it is already there, and you have about 5 conditions in there, and we are able to add others.
Through you, Chair, it is possible to add some elements to the Part 5 agreement. Some of the discussions today have veered into areas where I don't agree that we have a basis to include in the Part 5.
Okay, thank you.
Thank Councillor Dutton. I'll have some questions on that, but we'll go to the Lord Mayor first, and then Councillor Lohberger.
If the owner, if we say we want a public easement, access easement close to the southern side of the creek as part of the Part 5 agreement, and the owner signs it, then that's all good, isn't it?
Through you, Chair, I don't believe that we have the power to impose a condition that requires a public walkway through the property. I don't believe that there is a basis to do that in the legislative framework and in the planning scheme. I understand, Lord Mayor, that you're indicating that as the applicant has, that they might be willing to agree to that, and if they end up proposing that voluntarily, then that would be a different case. But
once it's in the Part 5 agreement, it is legally binding on future owners.
Through you, Chair, my advice is that we don't have the power to require that as a condition.
We don't have the power to require it, but if it becomes an agreement that's signed and is a Part 5 agreement, then it is there, isn't it? It's then a contract or an agreement, a legally binding agreement.
Through you, Chair, I think the proper legal mechanism would be through an easement, which, given that this proposal involves a subdivision, the applicant could offer up an easement as part of the finalisation of the new titles that will be created. I think
so your advice would be Part 5 should be more about the elements of the landscaping plan and things like no fence and those sort of things, whereas for that basic, what is it called, easement or right-of-way or whatever, that's through another mechanism.
Through you, Chair, I will just clarify up front that there have been discussions about elements of this proposal that are included in the application and elements that aren't part of the current application. So solar panels, fences, dwellings on the other side of the rivulet. It's my view that we don't have the power to impose any conditions, including the Part 5 condition relating to things that aren't part of this application. So I just wanted to clarify that, given that was one of the comments that you'd made. But yes, also fundamentally, it's my view that there's a separate legal mechanism for imposing that easement, or they can impose a covenant on the land, restricting their own development of that land. But that, in my view, should be a voluntary process, not something that we require through the planning permit.
Okay, no, well, if I mean, I'm not saying that it's, if it is proceeding, then I would suggest that we do have the condition around an easement.
Through you, Chair, I would like to clarify that I don't think we have the legal ability to impose that via a condition. Would be happy to include it as an advice clause in the permit, indicating that we encourage the applicant to impose either an easement or a covenant over that land, but it's my view that we don't have that as a legal power to condition.
So in Tasmania, waterways have sort of you can privatise waterways. There's no ability to have setbacks, easements. Is that a Tasmanian thing, or?
Through you, Chair, people can impose covenants on their own land to...
No, I know, but a waterway is, I think in many parts of the world and in many parts of Australia, a waterway is generally seen as a public asset, and you can't sort of buy a bit of a river or a bit of a coastline.
And if you own both sides.
Oh, can we?
Through you, Chair.
Oh, and yeah, and can we get the question?
Through you, Chair, the Urban Drainage Act acknowledges that rivulets and other waterways pass through private land, and that they are part of the public stormwater system, and that the council has certain rights to go and access them. But that legislation doesn't give members of the public generally enabled to have access to private land to enjoy for other reasons. It's very much a functional piece of legislation rather than one focused on public use and enjoyment.
Doesn't our planning scheme say that you've got to build 10 metres back from the top of the bank? We're giving something. We're saying you can build right up to the top of the bank. In this case, aren't we going to ask for something back for that, or are we just going to give it away?
Through you, Chair, this is private land. As long as
doesn't our planning rules say that developments should be 10 metres back from the top of a bank, which I think is actually very narrow compared to most cities. It's sort of 20 or 30 metres. Development has to be back 20 or 30 metres from the top of a bank. Ours is 10 metres. Surely we should be trying to keep to that. And in this case, I think we've allowed them to develop right up to the top of the bank on one side. So wouldn't we then negotiate an easement on the other side?
Through you, Chair, there are requirements in the planning scheme regarding protection of properties in circumstances where inundation is likely to impact the property, and clearly because there's a rivulet running through this property, there is that risk, and we've assessed the physical form against the requirements of the planning scheme, and we're comfortable that it complies. There's a separate process under the Urban Drainage Act which says if you want to build within a certain distance of the rivulet, and that may be where you're getting the 10 metres from, then there's another bunch of hoops to jump through essentially. But I can say that this developer has worked very closely with our stormwater team. It's had involvement both from our environmental scientist, who's focused on the health of the rivulet, and also our senior stormwater engineer, who is focused on the hydraulic element of the rivulet, and they're both satisfied that this can proceed.
I think for the public and for elected members, unfortunately, all these kind of conversations that happen and then aren't necessarily recorded in things that last tend to sort of, wash away after a few months once the development starts. And we see this with landscape plans and all sorts of things that just aren't honoured. And so that's why Part 5 agreement is really important. I'm glad that's there. But I just want to, we've had other issues with development right up to the rivulet bank in Lena Valley, where it's literally bare earth right up to the rivulet, and it causes massive environmental challenges. We've just published a rivulets report. I'm just wondering why we think buildings right up against top bank of a rivulet meets performance standard because of some, like, why wouldn't we try and keep that 10-metre buffer away from the rivulets as best practice? And that's what's in our planning scheme, isn't it?
Through you,
Oh,
Chair.
sorry, that's in the Urban Drainage Act, sorry. Yeah.
I guess ultimately all the regulations surrounding our waterways are designed to find a balance between what's safe, what's good in terms of the health of the rivulet, but although also balanced against private property rights. And we have gone through this application extensively, and I do appreciate your comment about some of those discussions taking place before it comes to the chamber. That's the reality of getting expert input from various parts of the council. I guess all I can do is reassure you that we have looked at this very carefully, and at officer level we're comfortable that the application can be supported, and that's in the context of various quite extensive conditions that are proposed about further work that will need to be done to ensure the rivulet is protected.
Yeah, okay, I'll leave it there, but I do feel that I don't know many places in Australia where councils are approving developments to the top of banks of rivulets or creeks. It's kind of very 1970s, really. I think everyone's moving things back from rivulets. So anyway, I don't really understand how we've given that away, but that's a big concern for me.
Okay, Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got quite a few questions for staff, unfortunately, so look, we'll start at the top. Just through you, Chair, I just want to start on parking and traffic. I've sort of, like the rest of us, I've been up there. It's a pretty tight little street, right at the top, and it's pretty tight all the way, really. Look, I just wanted to ask through you, are officers satisfied that the development won't cause parking and traffic congestion issues for the existing residents in the area?
Through you, Chair, I can see, I can acknowledge your concerns. I've been there myself, and it does feel very tight, particularly in one particular spot. Ultimately, this is an area that's not covered particularly well in the planning scheme. The planning scheme's focused on assuming that the council's got an adequate road network, essentially, and that the focus is on getting on and off the private lot that's being developed, not focused on should the council infrastructure be upgraded down the street or you know, down at a further junction. So while I hear very strongly the theme coming through from the representations about the inadequacy of some parts of that, there's not a great deal we can do, unfortunately.
Just a supplementary on that through you, Chair. Have we imposed any conditions as part of the application around trying to minimise that impact on local residents?
Through you, Chair, I think it's worth acknowledging that the applicant themselves have volunteered to include a lot of that land in the application. Arguably, they didn't need to do that, and they could have sort of, you know, focused much more on their site, and that we would have had a lot more difficulty imposing some of those works via condition. So they've met us at the door, I guess, in the sense of acknowledging that there are some issues and that they are doing some works as part of the application itself, and I think that's really as much as we can do.
Thank you. Just moving on to just the little issue about the ability to access that right of way through 43 or next to 43 Manning Avenue. Is that a private right of way that can't actually be accessed, or is it a right of way that can be accessed? I just wanted to clear this up.
It's public land that the public can access. it is a little bit quirky that there's a right-of-way marked on that title, so there may be some additional rights there if the council did ever decide to do anything down the track with that land, but there's certainly no intention to do so at the moment. So the public can, rather than cut through this private land, they can continue along Manning Avenue and then go down that access point.
Thank you for clearing that up. Right, stormwater, and I think probably asking a few similar questions to the Mayor, but just in a different way. Just referring to 6.17.4, which is on page 190 to 191. It just refers to the stormwater quality and quantity targets in accordance with the state stormwater strategy. I'm just wanted to ask, does this proposal achieve those targets?
The planning, sorry, through you, Chair. The planning scheme requires that, in an ideal world, water-sensitive urban design principles will be used, and if not, then we go to the performance criteria, which relies on those certain targets being met. We're satisfied at this point that the application is capable of meeting those standards, and there are further requirements via the conditioning process to clarify that.
Just through you again, Chair. Page 191, at 6.17.5, I just wondered if we could get a plain language explanation of the information contained within the quotation marks on page 191.
Sorry, I'll just take a moment.
Yeah, you're right.
It's a big document.
Through you, Chair. So the two key issues with stormwater is managing the quantity of stormwater coming off the site, but also the quality of it. And again, in an ideal world, there'd be treatments on site so that water's filtered naturally and it doesn't have to be treated in a mechanical way. As I understand it, this application will rely on a mechanical treatment of to ensure that sediment and similar things aren't contaminating the stormwater system, and so that's my attempt at plain English version of what's being explained there.
Is that what's referred to as unusual? Just that mechanical.
The
SSS target for the TSS.
Through you, Chair, I might have to take that specific element on notice. My apologies.
Okay, just moving on.
And sorry, can I just, what are the fines if you don't meet those things, or what are the consequences?
Through you, Chair, the Urban Drainage Act requires, aside from any planning permit condition, requires that people don't put contaminants into the stormwater system, and there is a process under that legislation for requiring compliance with the standards in the legislation.
We police that.
We are able to do that, yes.
Councillor Loberger.
Sorry, just going on, Chair. Just moving through these points on stormwater, 6.17.6, so the next one down on page 191, it just states the proposal complies with the performance criteria P2. Can we just get an explanation as to how it complies?
Through you, Chair. Again, this is focused on the quality of the stormwater that would be coming off the site, and we treat planning as an indicative conceptual phase. The information that's been provided to us at this point, we're satisfied that the planning requirements are met to a certain level, and then we're requiring further details to be provided via the conditioning process.
Thank you. A final question just about stormwater. The proposal will convert or cover a significant area of the block with impervious surfaces, which will clearly increase runoff during rain events. Do we have any information just about how the effect of that extra runoff has been modelled, and particularly the effect on the infrastructure downstream, further down Manning Avenue?
Through you, Chair, there has been some modelling done on the what they call afflux modelling, which is to do with a model with no development and then a model with development, and understanding what the impacts of the development are on water flows on the site. There is an acknowledgement that there will be some minor impacts downstream, but not to the point where downstream property owners are significantly impacted. This is something that our officers are highly focused on to ensure that, you know, what somebody does on one land doesn't impact other private property.
Thank you for confirming that. Last question is just a bit of an unusual one. Just a couple of the representatives have raised the fact that the site's been used for public access for decades. Does that have, I mean, beyond sort of the issues around whether access is granted now, are there any other sort of planning issues raised by the fact that the public has simply used the site as a right-of-way for so long?
Through you, Chair, no, the simple answer is no, the planning scheme doesn't. There are various legal principles that operate in the back there in the sense of, you know, we commonly call public access highways, but there's quite a process around actually those rights being dedicated essentially as public land. And while it's clear that there's been a lot of informal use, I don't know that there's any evidence at all that this has been dedicated as a public way.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I have some questions myself, and then I have Councillor Basalt, Councillor Dutta and Councillor Kelly in that order. But that does, Councillor Lohberger's last question flows on to my first. On the issue of the right-of-way, given that it has been noted numerous times it is private property, and some of the points made by the applicant, first of all, are we able to legally condition that the public thoroughfare be maintained? And B, as noted by the applicant, if the applicant or the property owner were to maintain a public thoroughfare, are there risks of legal liability should something happen or someone get injured on what fundamentally is private property?
Thank you, Chair. No, it's my view that we don't have the power to require that. If that's something that the property owner or the body corporate allows to take place informally, then it's a matter for them and their insurer in terms of who's responsible for what. I anticipate that there is already quite a bit of signage in the area. I anticipate that the council would review the signage to ensure that it was clear to the public what was private and what was public land.
And so that brings me to a supplementary question. Noting that this isn't what's being proposed, I'm just saying for the purpose of the argument, if a giant wall was placed around the border of this property and the public weren't able to access it, would the public still have access through that area to get from one end to the other?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, they would. There's a proposal for a footpath to be run along the highway reservation so that people could walk down the steps from Churchill Avenue, over the bridge, along that new section, and then continue on to the footpath that already exists on Manning Avenue.
Thank you. And then just lastly, and this is another one on liability, just because there's been a lot of talk about landslip, damaging the topography in the ground and destabilising with construction and all of that was said. If there was damage to the surrounding properties due to the construction, there would be legal protections and for affected properties, would there?
I will just be a little bit cautious about potentially giving legal advice. Mm-hmm. What I will say is that the planning process has various requirements regarding landslip. That includes a report from the applicant's team about the existing risk, mitigation processes, and then the resulting risk. And they're proposing to follow Australian standards and standard geotech processes to ensure that any risks are minimised. Alongside that, there are separate processes under the building legislation for works to be done which may impact on other properties. There are obligations to serve notices on adjoining landowners, and that will set out to a certain extent what the insurance arrangements are and the potential liabilities.
Thank you. All right, we'll go to Councillor Basalt.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the Director. Is there any mechanism by which we can enforce that the landscape plan is completed prior to final sign-off or sale of dwellings?
Through you, Chair, yes, we could do that. That's not currently, I don't think, part of the conditions, but that is something that we could do. We could impose a condition requiring that to be completed before the use commences.
And that would include making sure that the rehabilitation of the rivulet and things is all complete before they can sell it. As that forms part.
Yeah, yes. Well, we could require that. I'll just double check to see what the timing is on the proposed conditions. Through you, Chair, we could add a sentence in, the next body of work which would be done calls for timeframes for implementation. So we could...
we can condition it. And,
we could condition it.
And it's binding?
Yes.
Right, good, very good. Can we also condition, through you, Chair, non-reflective surface for the roof?
Through your Chair, yes, that is part of the proposed conditions or amendments to the conditions which I have prepared. Perhaps we could have those shown on the screen so that elected members could review what I've prepared.
Very helpful, Director, thank you.
While we're waiting for that, did you have any other questions?
I do not.
Should hopefully just be a couple of... here we go.
Perhaps if we could have slowly scrolled through those conditions.
Yep.
The first couple of conditions or the possible amendments are to do with circulating copies of the construction management plans. So that's the first two there. If we keep the next is to do with possible additions to the Part 5 agreement regarding the rivulet reconstruction rehabilitation plan and also the landscaping plan. There are already conditions for those plans to be provided and approved and complied with, but this would add an extra level of protection in the sense that they would carry on with the titles. The final one is a proposed condition about the materials being non-reflective. Not sure whether Councillor Basalt, whether that is what you're expecting.
Chair, are we ready to kick off?
Oh, anyone can.
I think there's more. More
questions.
We can, but I'm happy. Like if somebody wants to move, though, we can still continue asking questions as we go through for sure. Yes. So you feel free to kick things off.
Sure, I might kick things off and then people can ask further questions. Look, based on what I've seen here and the additional answer for landscaping, I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation with these conditions and with the additional landscaping must be completed before final sign-off, including rehabilitation of the rivulet. I think that this is really tricky for neighbours. It's really tricky for Hobartians. It's really tricky for the guys that I can see looking on really enthusiastically. This site it's remarkable. It's a lovely spot. It's a great spot where you can stand, get some sun, enjoy the natural surrounds. And I know the site, and I also know Mr. Corrigan's place because I've been there. It's remarkable, and I do genuinely feel for you. But at the same time, it is private land, and because we haven't purchased it, we've wound up in this spot. It's still private. I think that some of these conditions are satisfy the needs for the rivulet's health, And I think that's really important, especially in light of the Platypus Guardian, which we've all seen and loved. Our rivulets are really important, and I appreciate the work that neighbours such as Mr Corrigan do to keep these rivulets healthy. I do think that the way the design has been done is very site specific. So while it is a high building, I think that we are getting a better outcome than if we had, 2 stories spread across the whole site. Much better outcome. And I really, kudos to the architect. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful building. Keeping fences out of it is a really good idea, and that's an advice clause, I think, or it's...
You could put that in the Part 5 agreement.
Yeah. We can put in Part 5?
Through you, Chair, given that that's not proposed in the application, I don't think that can be included in the Part 5 agreement.
So, we're trying to keep public access here. We're trying to keep it open as much as we can. And I think that this is the quintessential missing middle. This is what Hobart doesn't have any of. There are very few 200 square metre apartments in Hobart, let alone ones set in lovely bush surrounds where you can actually have the tranquility and enjoy all the great things that Hobart has to offer. It's large apartments, but it's also that missing middle. It's denser. It's providing 11 families with a home. And we know that even though these are executive buildings, that the more stuff we have at the higher end, the lower the prices will be further out of town. So this does actually help to address the housing crisis. And I know that's not part of planning, but it is part of my commentary, which unfortunately I feel the need to say because of some social media about my comments in planning. I think that this does meet the planning scheme. Officers have recommended its approval. And I think that if the developers can take on note that these sorts of developments at this particular juncture may influence, the outcomes may influence future decision making, which I think Councillor Harvey has referenced, and might sway councils in the future as to approving them this type of development. I'd really love to see you guys really put your best foot forward. So I'm happy to move it with these additional conditions, and I'd encourage you guys to vote the same way.
I've got Councillor Dutta next. Did you add? Oh.
Thank you. I just have one question and one observation. And the question is, one of the in deputation stated that what is the accuracy of the shadow diagram? How accurate are they? I just want clarification on that.
Through you, Chair. As I understand it, the software and the Ms. Walsh may be able to assist here, but the software used by architects it's programmed into, so it's not something that's manually done. Once they understand what the levels of the land are and the proposed structure on top, it's actually quite an accurate proposal of what the impacts will be.
Thank you. And the observation I make here is this, that on a number of these performance criteria, the report states, for example, and I make the comparison here, that the proposal or the proposed access may therefore be accepted, for example, with regards to traffic, with regards to overshadowing and all that. But then there are other performance criteria where it is very clear and categorical, and it says the proposal complies with the acceptable solution. So while, on a number of occasions it may, and then there's no may, it is. So what is the difference? Because from a legal term, the may, for me, I interpret it differently.
Chair, that ultimately boils down to officers' choice of language. Our engineers do tend to be a little bit more restrained, I guess, with their language, but ultimately what they're doing is recommending that the application meets that relevant performance criteria and that provides a foundation for an approval.
Just a follow-up question, Chair. So that's a discretionary thing that we can also use ourselves as councillors, that it may not do that and take a contrary may.
Through you, Chair, each of the discretions that are listed in the report are the issues that you are turning your mind to today, and absolutely you can form a different view from the officer recommendation.
I've got, if Councillor Dutt is done, I've got Councillor Kelly, and then I think it looks like the Lord Mayor has some remarks she wants to make as well. Councillor Kelly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was a question in line with what you were asking about the liability if this is a public access way. Further to the question I said to the developer or to the designers here, and I commend them for providing this space, and it's great. But I just want to make sure we have no ramifications by saying yes, it's good there. Is that fully incumbent, through you, Chair, to the Director? Any legal requirements will be incumbent upon whoever makes that a public spaceway there. Nothing will come back to bite council.
Through you, Chair. So the areas that are currently proposed to be part of the road reservation, so part of council land that will be transferred to us as part of the new lot that's been created. So that's at the moment the only area that's specifically proposed for the public. So that's would become our obligation to maintain and covered by our usual insurances and things. So that's very clear in terms of who has liability for that. It does, you know, as I said earlier, if the owner informally allows the public onto their land, then that's absolutely a matter for them.
I just wanted, in fairness to the developer, to make sure everyone was aware of that. Thank you. That's explained that.
Lord Mayor.
Yeah, look, I'm feeling a little bit frustrated about Part 5 agreements, because I know the Part 5 agreement on Tolman's Hill, and I know it has broad application. It didn't cover everything that was in, you know, because it was a very big subdivision proposal, so not everything with every house could have been covered in the application. I also get concerned because we have many examples where, and this isn't to do with Part 5, but where something's not included in a development application, then it gets put in, and everyone runs around and goes, oh, they'll have to put in a planning application for that. And it often doesn't come back to us at all. It goes to an officer's because nobody knows about it. I'm thinking about sort of extractor fans in a particular one that's current at the moment. But this happens dozens of times a year, and it gets just put through. So, you know, and the Part 5 agreement legislation that I'm reading is under LUPA, Part 5 may provide for any of the following, and they're very broad: a prohibition, restriction or regulation, conditions that may be undertaken, a matter that is intended to achieve the objectives of LUPA, which includes the sustainable use and development of land. Like, you know, I think I'd rather we be a bit more ambitious with our Part 5 agreements, including saying that we don't want there to be a fence. And yes, I guess one day a future owner of this property might say, I'm going to challenge that in law, but I still think Part 5 agreements are there to actually be like a bit of a deal between the council and a private owner. So I guess I'd be asking Councillor Posselt whether, contrary to the view whether we could enforce it or not, whether the Part 5 agreement would also articulate that there be no fence constructed around the landscaped area. Councillor Posselt, are you willing to put that into your...
I have to take the expert advice. So if the expert advice says yes, then I'm happy to include it. If the expert advice says no, then I'm
Through you, Chair, perhaps I can give you some comfort, Lord Mayor, just to explain the fundamentals of a condition. So there are 3 fundamental requirements. 1, it has to relate to the application itself. 2, it has to stem from a requirement of the planning scheme. And 3, it has to be not unreasonable. And the difficulty with conditioning that things don't happen in the future is that it's not to do with what's being proposed today. The other difficulty with Part 5 agreements, and this is a systemic issue, is that they don't provide a basis for refusal. So if somebody comes in, if we say no fence in a Part 5, and then somebody comes in the next day and says, I want a fence, then we can't say, oh, sorry, there's a Part 5 agreement and the planning scheme says that justifies a refusal. And given that structures like fences are, depending on what's proposed, they're often exempt anyway, there's a clash between what people think a Part 5 is capable of doing and what the reality is in subsequent applications.
Okay, Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. Now, just following that, I'm thinking of the Coty principle in law. Now, if we are thinking of climate change and the flooding that might happen, and we can reasonably foresee that in the Tasmanian planning scheme that's coming in, can we take some action and make a decision with regards to that in that context?
Through you, Chair, just for the benefit of other elected members, the Coty principle is a principle that says this is what the planning scheme is at the moment, but we know that this planning scheme is coming into effect in the near future. And while we're making a decision under here, we're going to take the latest scheme into effect as well. That does not apply in Tasmania due to the legislative requirements that we make our decision in accordance with the existing planning scheme. And I will say that even if we were able to take the Tasmanian planning scheme into account, I'm not necessarily sure that that would advance any of the concerns that have been raised tonight.
Is there any other comment or questions on this? Councillor Harvey?
Look, yeah, just the way I saw the Part 5 is it's not across a whole, all their private land that doesn't attach to the council land. So it might be along that fence line between the council reserve, Macaulay Reserve, and their land. But that would be the only part where Part 5 agreement, and the rest would just be, you know, the goodwill of the owners of the land to allow people to pass through it.
Yeah, right, so the fence between the boundary with the council land and the creek.
That's where I thought a Part 5 might apply, but not along the creek through the land, because that's private land the whole way through. So I thought Part 5's always kind of existed where there was a relationship with the private land and the council land.
Through you, Chair, no, not necessarily. I mean, Part 5 agreements are often used, and the best example of circumstances where Part 5s are effective is where it's for an ongoing obligation. So, for example, a bushfire has a management plan. You have to do this to your property every year, and that's part of the, you know, the title. It's a legal requirement.
Regardless of whether it's connected to any council land, it could be.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. Look, I'm just with regard to this project. If they can pull this off, you know, and that's the big if, with regard to the shifting of the stream, the revegetation side of it, the environmental benefits of having a native area as opposed to the weed infested area it is now, then fantastic. That'd be a great outcome. I think that would be a bonus for the whole rivulet running through. With regards to the development, I do think it's slightly overscale for what I would like, but it's recommended for approval. So I think we're bound there. I just broke my pen. So I'm going to support it tonight with certain hesitations, because you know, I have reservations that it'll look like it does in the brochure. You know, once you see the final product, that's when we'll be able to make the decision, but it might be too late by then. If it doesn't happen like a particular development in West Hobart that looked fine on the plans, but then now you can see it from outer space. And it just made a big difference to my views on certain things. And I think, well, I thought something, and I'm looking at something different to what I expected. So I'm hoping tonight, if we agree to this, that we'll get something very much like has been promised, and hopefully it'll exceed expectations rather than depress me in a couple of years' time. So I will support it tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I'll just make a few remarks myself. Look, I'll also be supporting this. I think, noting that this has been a piece of property that's been used as a public thoroughfare, we do also need to note that it is private property. And my concerns about liability and all of that has been already said. I know the applicants have said that, you know, they're not, well, they're happy to allow that property to incidentally be used by members of the public, but I think we do need to be careful stepping into the realm of pretty much breaching private property rights by trying to condition things that aren't conditionable under the planning scheme through various mechanisms. I think that would be very easily challenged legally. On the application itself, and I will note, and I know Councillor Basalt also noted comments made by the applicant that, you know, the site does have a lot of great factors about it, and a big part of that is the natural, the access to the rivulet, the natural beauty of the place. The same number of dwellings could have been achieved with a lower, flatter form, but it would have necessitated a larger footprint and less wilderness on that area effectively. So I do appreciate the toss up there. I don't think it is overly large, effectively, given the topography of the site, how it slopes. I do perhaps share some concerns about landslip, but I would hope that is something that, you know, if damages were made, that would be something that would be resolved through mechanisms other than through the planning process. I think that's more of a construction and legal matter. Otherwise, I see this as something that would be a great addition to the local area. I think it's, as has been said, much needed housing, which isn't necessarily an aspect of the application itself, but I fundamentally think should be. And noting that as was discussed, that this sort of level of density did allow considerations of up to around about 14. So it is almost a pity that there isn't more being built on this area. But I think the applicants have done a great job of balancing those different factors on this site. On the issue of Part 5 agreements, I think we do need to be really, really careful. As someone who did live in Tom's Hill, I'm glad that the example came up. I had multiple people come up to me in my time living there, quite annoyed at the nature of some of the Part 5 agreements on there that effectively necessitated and mandated certain trees and vegetation that are also on the same list of the TFS's recommended trees to stay the hell away from if you live in an area that's prone to bushfire risk. And these are the same flora that's mandated Part 5 agreement in Thomas Hill. So I think we do need to be careful writing these things on the floor of council without giving really, really serious consideration to the potential externalities of it and the potential legalities. And it's not something I'd be supporting doing tonight. I will support the conditions that have been, or the proposed conditions that have been discussed, as well as the recommendations of the officers as put by Councillor Basalt. I see the Lord Mayor with a hand up as well.
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to make some comments about it. I want to. It has been more than 2 hours on this application, and I don't think we've got our process quite right. I mean, I think unfortunately now we've only got the one place to consider it, but given the complexities of this site and the sensitivity of this site, the fact that it's on one of our important rivulets, I think, you know, we should have had a site visit. I also would have liked to have received the representations before yesterday lunchtime. 25 very considered, important representations, and it's hard for elected members to read them when they are turned up on the hub yesterday lunchtime. So I feel like, part of me would like to defer this, because I feel like there's things in here like ensuring we've got a good Part 5 agreement, I think would have been really important. I also, I think the design looks really great, but as we know from experience, sometimes that doesn't sort of work out how it's presented. I do think that the representative saying that if it had been a 9 apartments at 3 levels, it probably would have been a more appropriate scale for the site. I'm really not happy about building right up to the top of the bank of any rivulet or any waterway in 2023. We're just about to put a flood-prone zone overlay over this area, and yet we're allowing building right up to the top of the bank and filling it up with a lot of hard surfaces. And unfortunately the conditions and the sort of regulatory environment that we're dealing with in Tasmania, where there aren't adequate protections for setbacks, that we don't have good compliance resources, so things happen and we never pursue them, or we don't pursue things as well as we can. It just makes it really difficult to support this, given its bulk and scale. As I said, if it was a bit smaller, if the setbacks from the top of the bank, if there wasn't a sort of proposal to modify the rivulet, that I don't feel I've been given adequate briefing on, what modifying the rivulet, like a private owner modifying a rivulet that will affect downstream properties and basically public waterways, and unless I had some better understanding of that and how that came up and whether that was modelled independently or whether that was done by a consultant paid for the developer, all of that just makes it, difficult, because I think our rivulets, we do have to be a bit careful with them, and given extreme events and hazards, I'm reluctantly, I'm not going to support this project. If it could have been not supported and they come back with a slightly setback, slightly less, maybe the apartment's not being as big. I mean, density of 14 is one thing, but there's a lot of space in these apartments, like they're very, very large, which is, again, I understand the reasons for that, but is this the right place for this scale of development so close to a rivulet? That's my concern, so I won't be supporting it tonight. Thank you.
Are there any, Councillor Dutta? And then Councillor Lohberger.
Just a question through you, Chair. Again, I'm just listening to the Lord Mayor. Do we have the time to defer this, to get that more detailed information and clarification so that we are in a much better position to make the decision?
Through you, Chair, the application expires on the 25th of August. So, and the next planning committee meeting is on the 23rd of August.
Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair. This one's been quite a hard decision for me. I was quite worried about the rivulet and the effect on the people downstream, the effect on the rivulet itself. On the other side of the coin, obviously something that's not necessarily a planning issue, but I'm obviously aware of the need for more housing in this city, and I do think it looks like a great proposal once it's built. Look, I'm just going to have to put my trust in the council staff and in the advice from our staff about the treatment of the rivulet, and so I will be supporting this particular proposal, but it was a close run thing for me.
Anyone else? Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. No, I was quite reluctant to support this because of a number of clauses that I looked at, the planning scheme clauses. But having asked the question and given the explanation from the acting director, I am now more inclined to say, yes, I would support it, but I would love to have had more time to read it more thoroughly, to understand it in a greater detail. That's my hesitation. So with hesitation, I will support it.
Okay. Is there any other comment? Or we'll put the item as moved by Councillor Basalt. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Again say no. Okay, show of hands, all those in favour. And against? So that is carried. Thank you everybody for taking part and listening in and for your patience. We'll now move back to item, bear with me, 6.1.12 Davies Avenue. Who wants to kick this one off? Oh. Yep. Any questions or comments? Councillor Harvey.
I did have a couple of questions for Shannon. You still awake, Sharon? Shannon? Just called you Sharon.
You look like you might be called worse.
One was with regard to lighting. We've come a long way in the last few years with regard to dark skies and understanding the requirements of bats and other birds that are disrupted by lighting. Are we trying to mitigate those sort of things with regard to this lighting? Is it better than the past lighting when it comes to wildlife on the domain? As we know, it's one of our most valued areas in Hobart because of its conservation values. How are we addressing the dark skies kind of thing with regard to the lighting on the domain? Because potentially it's a great spot to go and look at the stars of a night time in the middle of a city. And secondly, what's the impact on the bat population or the nocturnal bird population like ours and things?
Sure. Through you, Chair, thanks for the question, Councillor Harvey.
Sorry, Councillor Dutta.
We're out of a quorum.
Councillor Dutta, if you leave, we won't have quorum.
This will only take, we'll be out of here in 5 minutes.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Need to go to the toilet or something.
Continue.
With regard to modern lighting systems compared to the old ones, we find this, despite being a lot more powerful than the old lighting system at the Domain Athletic Centre, there'll be a lot less light spill because there are higher towers, which enables the lighting to be more directed to the ground and actually light the areas you want rather than have the light spill that we currently have up there because you've got lower poles and the lights face across the ground and you have a lot more light escaping the site with the current lighting system.
All right. Well,
than the proposed. There's also the option with this system too. A lot of the modelling has been done on the 200 lux levels, but they'll be switchable from 50 lux, which will be what's commonly used for most of the clients, up to the 200 lux, which will be used for competitions.
Okay. All right. You've answered my question. Happy to support the recommendation.
Thank you. Any other comment or questions? Okay, I'll
just to put very quickly, just to put on record that seeing sporting facility lighting upgraded to modern and providing the best facilities is something that I campaigned on. It's really good to see us coming through with goods.
Well done, Ross.
Oh, it's all me, obviously. That's it.
I'll put that. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. It's carried. So we'll smash through this. The
remaining items as a job lot, if
on
that's
block.
acceptable, except for questions.
Accept questions. Before we do that, I'll accept that, Councillor Harvey. Are there any issues? Are there any items of note in the advertising application report, Mr. Wright?
Just two, through you, Chair. The first is 29 Trumpeter Street, which is the mechanical plant to the top of Shippies, which has been called in by the Lord Mayor, so that'll be coming on the 23rd of August. And the other is just to note that an application's been approved at 48 Liverpool Street, which is the hospital, which is a small extension on the Campbell Street side to provide additional facilities for the emergency department staff.
Any questions?
Questions on notice or questions with staff?
Oh, either or.
I've got two questions. First one is, can we get a briefing note on the development pipeline, which is, I would define as projects of $5 million plus worth that have planning approval and are awaiting development?
Can I just clarify, awaiting building approval?
Yeah.
Or planning approval?
Just that they've been approved and we're waiting for them to go up, basically.
Planning approval, but not yet gone to progress to building.
If I could be of assistance, I asked a very, very similar question a couple of planning meetings ago. If you want to combine the response, I'd be happy to have the Lord Mayor's, if there's any differences, rather than doing two separate responses.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm not sure this is a planning one, but how many fire abatement notices did the council issue in the most recent calendar year?
Through you, Chair, I'll take that one on notice.
Great.
You moved it with the exception of. Okay, so we'll take those questions. I'll move the those other items as moved by Councillor Harvey on block. Oh, sorry, was there another?
Just a question on notice. Yeah. I just wanted to find out about the status the planning status and the ownership of the vacant road reserve between Bailey Street and Aberdeen Street in the glebe.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take that one on notice.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so apologies. I'll put 7.1 and 7.2 as a job lot as moved by Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
No, it's carried. We've done questions without notice. Can someone move that we close the open, open the close? Thank you, Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried. We'll just wait for 2 seconds for